You're imagining things. Daniel's words hung in the air between us, heavy with dismissal and a hint of contempt. I stared at him, my hand still clutching his phone, the damning messages glowing on the screen. How could he stand there, looking me in the eye, and deny what was right in front of us? I'm Eleanor Hartman, Ellie to those who know me, and in that moment I felt the carefully curated exhibition of my life begin to crumble. I'm not imagining anything, Daniel, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. These messages from C, they're from Clara, aren't they? Your assistant? A flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, crossed his face before it smoothed back into a mask of innocence. Clara? Don't be ridiculous, Ellie, she's just an employee. You're reading too much into this. But I knew. In that moment, with a clarity that was both terrifying and oddly liberating, I knew that the life I had built over the past 15 years was built on a lie. As Daniel continued to spin his web of denials and excuses, my mind wandered to happier times. I thought of the young, ambitious curator I had been when we first met, full of dreams, eager to make my mark on the art world. I remembered the thrill of our whirlwind romance, the pride I'd felt in supporting his burgeoning real estate career, the joy of building our family together. When had things started to change? When had I become so focused on being the perfect wife and mother that I'd lost sight of my own dreams? And when had Daniel started looking elsewhere for the excitement and passion that had once defined our relationship? The sound of small feet padding down the stairs pulled me from my reverie. Sophie, our 12-year-old daughter, appeared in the doorway, her long brown hair a tangled mess, her eyes still heavy with sleep. "Mom? Dad? Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I quickly set Daniel's phone down, forcing a smile onto my face. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Your dad and I were just talking. Why don't you go wake your brother? I'll have breakfast ready in a few minutes." As Sophie retreated, I turned back to Daniel. "This conversation isn't over," I said, my voice low but firm. "But right now, our children need us to be parents. We'll discuss this later." He nodded, a look of relief washing over his face. As he left the room to shower and dress for work, I leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to steady my breathing. I thought of Sophie and her younger brother, Liam. They were my masterpieces, the greatest works of art I had ever been a part of creating. How would this affect them? How could I protect them from the fallout of their father's betrayal? As I mechanically went through the motions of preparing breakfast, my mind raced with questions and fears. But beneath the turmoil, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was an opportunity. An opportunity to reclaim the woman I used to be, to show my children what strength and resilience truly looked like. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test every fiber of my being, challenge everything I thought I knew about myself, and ultimately lead me to a strength I never knew I possessed. The weeks following my discovery of Daniel's affair were a blur of denial and desperate hope. I wanted so badly to believe his explanations, to accept that I had misunderstood, that my fears were unfounded. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with each late night at the office, each hushed phone call, each moment of emotional distance. Sophie and Liam, perceptive as always, sensed the tension. Sophie, with her artist soul, became quieter, her artwork taking on darker, more chaotic themes. Liam, usually so boisterous, spent hours building elaborate Lego structures, as if trying to construct a stable world in miniature, to compensate for the one crumbling around him. One evening, as I tucked Liam into bed, he looked up at me with wide, worried eyes. "Mom, are you and Dad going to get divorced?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I forced a smile, smoothing his unruly hair. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" He shrugged, picking at a loose thread on his comforter. "Tommy at school said his parents fought a lot before they got divorced, and you and Dad. You don't laugh anymore." I gathered him into my arms, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, feeling the warmth of his small body against mine. "Your dad and I are going through a tough time," I said carefully. "But no matter what happens, we both love you and Sophie very much. That will never change." As I held my son, I felt a fierce determination well up inside me. These children, my masterpieces, deserved better than to be collateral damage in their parents' war. I would fight not just for my marriage, but for their peace of mind, their sense of security, their right to a childhood unmarred by adult betrayals. The next day, I decided to confront Daniel once and for all. I waited until the kids were asleep, the house quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. A wedding gift from Daniel's parents, its steady rhythm a mockery of the turmoil in my heart. I found him in his study, poring over blueprints for his latest real estate development. He looked up as I entered, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Hey babe, what's up?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "About Clara?" Daniel's face hardened, all pretense of warmth vanishing. "Ellie, we've been over this, there's nothing going on." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I know about the affair, Daniel. I've seen the texts, the photos. I know about the late nights and the business trips that never happened. I want the truth. Our children deserve the truth." For a moment, I thought he might continue to deny it, and he ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "Her name is Clara," he said finally. She's my assistant." The confirmation, though expected, still felt like a knife to the gut. "How long?" I managed to ask. 6 months, he admitted. "Ellie, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It's just, you've been so focused on the kids, on your writing. Clara, she understands the pressures of my work. Don't," I cut him off, unable to bear his justifications. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me or the children. You made a choice, Daniel. You chose to betray us." He stood then, moving towards me, his hands outstretched. "We can fix this, Ellie. We can go to counseling, work things out. For the kids' sake." I stepped back, out of his reach. "The kids' sake? You should have thought about them before you started sleeping with your assistant." The look that crossed Daniel's face then was one I'd never seen before, a mixture of anger, frustration, and something that looked almost like relief. "Maybe you're right," he said, his voice cold. "Maybe we can't fix this. Maybe it's time we face the fact that this marriage isn't working anymore." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with finality. In that moment, I saw our future unraveling. The custody battles, the division of assets, the whispers and pitying looks from friends and neighbors. But beneath the fear and the pain, I felt something else stirring, a fierce determination to protect myself and my children, no matter the cost. "If that's what you want," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice, "then I suggest you find a good lawyer. Because I won't let you take my children away from me." I turned and left the study, my steps echoing in the silent house. As I climbed the stairs to check on Sophie and Liam, I felt as though I was ascending into a new chapter of my life, one filled with uncertainty and challenges, but also with the potential for growth and rediscovery. The carefully framed portrait of our family life had been shattered, but as I stood in the doorway of my children's rooms, watching their peaceful sleeping forms, I made a silent vow. From the broken pieces of our past, I would create something new, a life filled with love, strength, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. Little did I know, the battle ahead would test that vow in ways I could never have imagined. The first custody hearing was set for a crisp October morning, the courthouse steps adorned with pumpkins and fall foliage, a cheery facade that belied the emotional turmoil within. I stood on those steps, smoothing down my carefully chosen outfit, conservative but not dowdy, put together but not overly polished, trying to quell the butterflies in my stomach. Marcus, my old college friend turned lawyer, appeared at my side, his presence reassuring. "Remember what we discussed," he said quietly. "Stay calm, stick to the facts, and don't let Daniel or his lawyer provoke you. We have a strong case, Ellie." I nodded, taking a deep breath. We did have a strong case, or so I thought. The evidence of Daniel's affair was clear, and I had been the primary caregiver for Sophie and Liam throughout our marriage. Surely any reasonable judge would see that the children belonged with me. But as we entered the courtroom, I realized that reason and fairness might not play as big a role as I had hoped. Daniel was already there, looking impeccable in a tailored suit, his lawyer a shark-like presence at his side. To my shock, Clara was there too, sitting in the gallery, her expression a mixture of defiance and smug satisfaction. The hearing began, and at first, things seemed to be going well. Marcus presented our case clearly and compellingly, highlighting my role as a devoted mother and Daniel's infidelity. But when it was Daniel's turn, the ground beneath my feet began to shift. His lawyer painted a picture of me that I barely recognized. A woman who had abandoned her career on a whim, who was emotionally unstable and neglectful of her children's needs. They presented evidence of times I had allegedly left the children alone for days, of erratic behavior that had concerned Daniel for years. I sat there, stunned, as lie after lie was presented to the court. Some were complete fabrications, others twisted versions of the truth. Yes, I had occasionally left the children with their grandparents for a weekend, to attend art exhibitions or writing workshops, always with Daniel's knowledge and approval. Now, these normal parenting decisions were being used against me, portrayed as acts of abandonment. The final blow came when Daniel's lawyer presented a series of text messages, allegedly between me and an old college friend, suggesting an affair of my own. I stared at the screen in disbelief as the messages were read aloud, my mind racing to understand how this could be happening. The texts were clearly fabricated. I hadn't spoken to Jake, the friend in question, in years. But they were there, in black and white, damning evidence of a transgression I had never committed. "Your Honor," Marcus interjected, his voice tight with controlled anger. "These messages are clearly fabricated. My client has not been in contact with this individual for over a decade. We demand to know how these were obtained and verified." Daniel's lawyer, a Miss Evelyn Reeves, smiled coldly. "We have sworn testimony from Mr. Hartman that he discovered these messages on Mrs. Depp Hartman's phone. If she claims they're fabricated, perhaps she'd like to submit her phone for forensic analysis." I felt the blood drain from my face. My phone, which contained not only my personal communications but also notes for my writing, private journal entries, and countless photos of my children, laid bare for strangers to pore over. The thought made me physically ill. Marcus must have sensed my distress because he quickly responded, "Your Honor, this is a clear invasion of privacy and an attempt to manipulate the court. We will need time to review these alleged messages and prepare a response." The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, nodded. "Very well. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. In the meantime, I'm ordering both parties to refrain from any non-essential contact and to maintain the current custody arrangement." As the gavel fell, I felt as though I had been punched in the gut. 2 more weeks of this limbo, 2 more weeks of Daniel having equal access to our children despite his betrayal. And now, with these false allegations hanging over my head, I feared what he might tell Sophie and Liam. Marcus guided me out of the courtroom, his hand steady on my elbow. As soon as we were in the hallway, I sagged against the wall, struggling to breathe. "How could they do this?" I whispered, tears threatening to spill. "Those messages, they're completely fake. I would never." I know it. I caught sight of Daniel and Clara leaving the courtroom, their heads close together in conversation. Daniel looked up, his eyes meeting mine for a moment. There was no remorse there, no hint of the man I had loved for 15 years, just a cold determination that sent a shiver down my spine. In that moment I realized that this wasn't just about the affair anymore. This wasn't even just about custody. This was war, and Daniel was prepared to destroy me to win it. As Marcus and I walked out of the courthouse, my mind was racing. How had Daniel gotten those fake messages? Who had helped him create them? And more importantly, what else was he capable of? "We need to be prepared for anything," I said to Marcus as we reached his car. "If he's willing to fabricate evidence, who knows what else he might do?" Marcus nodded grimly. "I agree. From now on, document everything. Every interaction with Daniel, every conversation with the kids, every unusual occurrence. No detail is too small." I thought of my journal, the outpouring of emotions and observations I had been recording since this nightmare began. "I've been keeping a journal," I admitted. "Do you think that could help?" A spark of interest lit Marcus's eyes. "Absolutely. A contemporaneous record of events can be incredibly powerful evidence. But Ellie, you need to be prepared. If we use your journal in court, it becomes part of the public record. Are you comfortable with that?" I hesitated, thinking of the raw, unfiltered emotions I had poured onto those pages. The fear, the anger, the moments of despair. But I also thought of the strength I had rediscovered through my writing, the determination to fight for my children and for myself. "Yes," I said finally, If it helps us get to the truth, I'm willing to share it. Marcus squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. That's my girl. Now let's get you home to your kids. Remember, in their eyes, you're not the woman Daniel is trying to paint you as. You're just mom. And right now, that's exactly who they need you to be. As we drove back to my house, I felt a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. Fear of what Daniel might do next, anger at the lies he had told, determination to fight for my children. But underneath it all, there was something else. A growing sense of my own strength. A realization that I was capable of far more than I had ever given myself credit for. I thought back to the woman I had been just a few months ago. So focused on being the perfect wife and mother that I had lost sight of my own dreams and ambitions. That woman would have been crushed by today's events, paralyzed by the fear of losing her children and her reputation. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The pain of Daniel's betrayal, the shock of his ruthless tactics in court, they hadn't broken me. They had awakened something in me, a fierce determination to not only survive this ordeal but to emerge from it stronger, to build a life for myself and my children that was based on truth and authenticity rather than appearances and expectations. As we pulled up to my house, I saw Sophie and Liam waiting on the porch, their faces anxious. I took a deep breath, pushing aside my own turmoil to focus on what they needed from me right now. Thanks, Marcus, I said, reaching for the door handle. For everything. He caught my hand, his expression serious. We're not done fighting, Ellie, not by a long shot. But I want you to know, I believe in you, and I believe we're gonna win this. I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for this friend who had re-entered my life just when I needed him most. Then I stepped out of the car and walked towards my children, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As I hugged Sophie and Liam close, breathing in their familiar scents and feeling their small bodies pressed against mine, I made a silent vow. No matter what Daniel threw at me, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, I would not let him take this away from me. I was more than just Daniel Hartman's soon-to-be ex-wife. I was Eleanor Hartman, artist, writer, and above all, a mother who would move heaven and earth for her children. The battle had only just begun. But standing there on my porch, with my children in my arms, and the first hints of my rediscovered strength flowing through me, I knew that I was ready to fight. And I was ready to win. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Marcus and I worked tirelessly to prepare our response to Daniel's allegations. We pored over phone records, credit card statements, and my meticulously kept calendar, building a solid timeline that contradicted the fabricated text messages. But it wasn't just about disproving Daniel's lies. We needed to present a compelling narrative of our own, one that showed me as the dedicated, loving mother I knew myself to be. We need character witnesses, Marcus said one evening as we sat surrounded by stacks of documents in his office. People who can speak to your relationship with the children, your involvement in their lives. I nodded, my mind racing. Sophie and Liam's teachers, I suggested. They've always commented on how engaged I am with their education, and maybe some of the other parents from their activities? Marcus made notes, nodding approvingly. Good. What about your own pursuits? We need to counter this image Daniel's trying to paint of you as someone who gave up everything for the family. Show the court that you're a well-rounded individual with your own passions and goals. I hesitated, thinking of the writing I'd been doing, the art classes I'd started taking again. They had been my lifeline through this ordeal, but I hadn't thought of them as anything more than personal outlets. Seeing my hesitation, Marcus leaned forward, his expression earnest. Ellie, you're not just fighting for custody here. You're fighting for your right to be a whole person, a mother and an individual with her own dreams. Don't let Daniel's narrative define you. His words struck a chord. For too long, I had allowed myself to be defined by my roles as wife and mother. It was time to reclaim the other parts of myself, the artist, the writer, the woman with dreams of her own. You're right, I said, straightening in my chair. I've been taking art classes at the community center, and I've been working on a series of essays about motherhood and identity. I could reach out to my instructor and some of the other students, maybe even share some of my writing with the court. Marcus's face lit up. Now that's what I'm talking about. Let's show them the real Eleanor Hartman. As we continued to build our case, I found myself drawing strength from unexpected sources. My journal, once a private outlet for my fears and frustrations, became a powerful tool. Reading back through my entries, I saw not just the pain of betrayal and the fear of loss, but also the gradual emergence of a stronger, more resilient version of myself. One entry in particular stood out. Today, Liam asked me why I've been painting so much lately. I tried to explain that sometimes, when words fail us, we can express our feelings through art. He thought about it for a moment, then asked if he could paint with me. We spent the afternoon side by side at the kitchen table, brushes in hand creating wild splashes of color on canvas. Liam's painting was all bold strokes and vibrant hues, a reflection, I think, of the tumultuous emotions he's been experiencing but can't quite articulate. As for me, I found myself painting a phoenix rising from ashes. It wasn't a conscious choice, but looking at it now, I realize it's a perfect representation of how I feel. This divorce, as painful as it is also an opportunity for rebirth. I'm not just Daniel's wife or Sophie and Liam's mother. I'm Eleanor Hartman, and I'm rediscovering who that woman is every day. Reading that entry, I felt a surge of determination. This was the story we needed to tell. Not just of a mother fighting for her children, but of a woman reclaiming her identity and her strength. As the day of the hearing approached, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Daniel's lies had thrown me off balance, but in preparing our response, I had found a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just reacting to his attacks anymore. I was actively shaping my own narrative. The night before the hearing, I sat down with Sophie and Liam. I had been careful not to burden them with the details of the legal proceedings, but I knew they could sense the tension in the air. "Mom," Sophie said, her voice small, "are you and Dad fighting because of us?" My heart clenched. "No, sweetheart," I said, pulling her close. "Your dad and I are having some grown-up problems, but none of this is your fault, or Liam's. We both love you very much." Liam looked up from where he was curled against my side. "But Dad said you might go away, that we might not see you anymore." I felt a flash of anger at Daniel for putting such fears into our children's heads. But I pushed it aside, focusing on the two pairs of anxious eyes looking up at me. "Listen to me, both of you," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "I am not going anywhere. No matter what happens, I will always be your mom, and I will always be here for you. Always." As I held my children close, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom not just as a woman fighting for custody, but as a mother determined to create a stable, loving home for her children, with or without Daniel's cooperation. The next morning dawned bright and clear. As I dressed in a simple but elegant suit, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who had discovered Daniel's betrayal all those months ago. There was a new strength in her eyes, a determination in the set of her jaw. "You've got this, Eleanor," I whispered to my reflection. "Time to show them who you really are." With a deep breath, I grabbed my bag, filled with the evidence we had gathered, my journal, and a portfolio of my recent artwork, and headed out the door. Whatever the outcome of today's hearing, I knew one thing for certain. I was done letting others define me. It was time to paint my own story, in bold, unapologetic strokes. The courthouse loomed before me, its stone facade a silent witness to countless human dramas. As I climbed the steps, my heels clicking against the marble, I felt a strange sense of calm. The nervous energy that had plagued me for weeks had crystallized into a steely determination. Marcus met me at the entrance, his face a mask of professional composure. "Ready?" he asked, his eyes searching mine for any sign of doubt. I nodded, squaring my shoulders. "More than ready." As we entered the courtroom, I saw Daniel and his lawyer already seated. Clara was conspicuously absent this time, a small victory, but one that bolstered my confidence. Daniel's eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I was surprised to see a flicker of uncertainty there. Good, I thought. Let him be the one off balance for a change. The judge called the court to order, and the proceedings began. Daniel's lawyer went first, reiterating their claims about my supposed instability and neglect. But this time, I didn't feel the crushing weight of helplessness. Instead, I found myself mentally countering each accusation, secure in the knowledge that we had the evidence to disprove them. When it was our turn, Marcus stood, his presence commanding the room's attention. "Your Honor," he began, "in the past 2 weeks, we have not only disproven the false allegations made against my client, but we have also compiled extensive evidence of Mrs. Hartman's dedication as a mother and her personal growth during this difficult time." He proceeded to methodically dismantle Daniel's claims. Phone records showing I was nowhere near the location of the alleged meetings with Jake. Testimonials from Sophie and Liam's teachers praising my involvement in their education. Character witnesses attesting to my stability and commitment to my children's well-being. But it was when Marcus introduced my journal and artwork that I felt the tide truly begin to turn. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice resonating with conviction. "These journal entries and paintings offer a raw, honest look at Mrs. Hartman's journey over the past months. They show not a woman spiraling into instability, but one who has used creativity and self-reflection to navigate an incredibly difficult situation with grace and resilience." As excerpts from my journal were read aloud and images of my paintings were displayed, I watched the judge's expression change. The stern mask softened, replaced by a look of thoughtful consideration. One particular entry seemed to strike a chord. "Today, I took Sophie and Liam to the art museum. As we wandered through the galleries, Liam tugged on my hand, pointing to a large abstract painting. 'Mom,' he said, 'it looks like a big mess, but when you step back, you can see a face. Is that what you mean about perspective?' I was stunned. We'd been talking about perspective in art, but I realized it applied to our lives right now too. Up close, this divorce feels like a chaotic mess of emotions and legal battles. But maybe if we step back, we'll see that it's shaping us into something new and beautiful." I hugged Liam tight, thanking him for the reminder. No matter how messy things get, I'm determined to help my children find the beauty in life. And maybe in the process, I'll rediscover it for myself too. As Marcus finished presenting our case, I caught Daniel shifting uncomfortably in his seat. His lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently in his ear. I didn't know what they were saying, but I could sense a change in the air. The judge called a brief recess, and as we filed out of the courtroom, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Daniel standing there, his expression a mix of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. "Ellie," he said, his voice low, "can we talk, privately?" I glanced at Marcus, who nodded almost imperceptibly. 5 minutes, he mouthed. I followed Daniel to a quiet corner of the hallway, my guard up but curiosity peaked. "What is it, Daniel?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. I want to apologize," he said finally. "For the lies, for trying to paint you as an unfit mother. It was wrong." I stared at him, trying to reconcile this apparent contrition with the man who had so ruthlessly tried to destroy me in court. Why this sudden change of heart? Daniel sighed, looking older and more vulnerable than I'd seen him in years. "Listening to those journal entries, seeing your paintings, I guess I forgot who you really are, Ellie. The woman I fell in love with, the amazing mother you've always been to our kids." For a moment I felt a flicker of the old warmth, the connection we'd once shared. But then I remembered the months of lies, the pain in Sophie and Liam's eyes, the battle I'd been forced to fight. "It's a little late for apologies, Daniel," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "What matters now is what's best for Sophie and Liam." He nodded, looking chastened. "I know that's why I've decided to drop the custody suit. I'll agree to joint custody, with you as the primary caregiver. It's what the kids need, what they deserve." I felt a rush of emotions, relief, triumph, and a bittersweet sadness for what might have been. But mostly I felt a profound sense of peace. The battle wasn't over, but the worst of it was behind us. "Thank you," I said simply. "I think that's the right decision." As we walked back into the courtroom, I caught sight of my reflection in a window. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who had discovered Daniel's betrayal all those months ago. She was stronger, more confident, with a light in her eyes that spoke of hard-won wisdom and unshakable determination. I took my seat beside Marcus, ready to face whatever came next. The canvas of my life had been blank and terrifying for a while, but now I could see the outlines of a new masterpiece taking shape. One painted in the bold colors of resilience, love, and hope.